Oil, milkshakes, and other matters abound. In There Will Be Blood, this is today's review. This is an excellent, excellent film, a great film, one of the key and best films of its decade, and arguably this is Paul Thomas Anderson's best work, at least so far. And at least so far, unless I'm mistaken, this is his only film that's been nominated for a Best Picture Oscar, so that's kind of cool. That makes it pretty distinct in his body of work, right? So a lot to get through here. I'll say right now, spoiler warning, the movie's been out a little bit, but I can't really get through a lot what I want to talk about without getting into spoilers. So I'll say spoiler warning, quick review if you haven't seen it. Drop everything right now, go see it. It's a fucking amazing film. So here we go. It is very loosely based on Upton Sinclair's novel Oil! Exclamation point. Loosely based. I don't think I've actually gone through the whole thing, to be quite honest. It's a little dry, but the movie's excellent, and it shows the rise of power and the decline in sanity and soul of Daniel Plainview, one of the most fascinating characters of recent films, to be honest, and of course one of the best performances we've seen in quite some time. Daniel DayLewis, every couple of years he comes off his mountain, he's like Buddhist training or something, comes back to Earth, delivers an amazing performance. This is one of his best performances, if not his best performance. That is kind of hard to say because he's such an incredible actor. But Daniel Plainview, he's perfect in this role, and it shows kind of the oil revolution, of early years. So there's like the oil rush, there's a gold rush first, so it kind of shows a transition between oil and gold rush, where Daniel Plainview, we're seeing him kind of build his empire from the very beginning. Like, he's getting gold, and then he has enough money to start his derricks and things like that. In this amazing kind of opening scene, like going into the movie for the first time, I remember not really knowing what to expect. So when we start the movie, like, first and foremost, was kind of jarring is like the music, right? It's Radiohead's Johnny Greenwood doing the music. So you think, oh, it's going to be this, I don't know, quaint movie about oil and derricks and pumping and all that good stuff. But the music really sets up for something a little bit darker, I guess, a little bit more probing, a little bit more provocative, which it certainly is. So the music kind of sets everything up, and within that first section of the movie, where we see everything kind of set up, we see him starting his empire, we see him picking up this baby, this child who would later become his business partner slash son slash ambassador to humanity, HW. So we see all that, and what's great about it is there's no dialogue in those scenes, so it's almost like playing out as a silent film, which is kind of cool. But it shows the main conflict of the movie, and where the plot really kind of gets boiling, is in Plainview going to a California town, little Boston, where the oil is just coming up to the ground. There's so much fucking oil there. We're on an ocean of oil, so it's him monopolizing this little town, and so that's where everything, and the kind of the conflict with the local preacher, played by Paul Dano, Eli, whose twin brother had tipped Plainview off about the amazing resources of oil in this town. So it's all about that and kind of the struggles there, where this movie, you could say it's definitely, it is about greed. It certainly is about madness, but where like the real kind of conflict of the movie is, it is like one of those, it's like a man versus God kind of thing, right? Because with Plainview and his quest for power and just kind of the person that he is, he admits that he does not like other people. He can't really relate to other people. He just kind of wants to be alone, but he wants that power, right? So he monopolizes this whole town, has pretty much all the money that he can want, but at the same time, he can't really have like the same power as God, basically. That's kind of like what man as a whole, what their quest is, right? So Plainview's demeanor, his plight is the same as man as a whole, really, when you think about it. So he wants to be bigger than God. Obviously, he's not a religious person, doesn't really believe it, but he wants to combat maybe like the concept of God. So there's these scenes where we see him kind of struggling with Eli, where it's like his men are going to the church and things like that. They're getting tired and blah blah blah, all that stuff. So there, that kind of like pops up every now and again, in between obviously other conflicts in the movie. So it is about how do I become bigger than God, basically. So with that, there's always the struggle between him and Eli, but what really kind of sets the movie, it goes in this really specific trajectory, which I think is brilliant, the way they set it up, the way they go piece by piece, because we have elements of the movie that come into play later, like when he's monopolizing this town, there's this one old man, Mr. Dandy, who won't sell, and it kind of becomes a key piece later on. But in one scene, of course, HW, he's deafened by the blast of one of the derricks, and that's kind of what sets everything off, because after that, just out of nowhere, basically, a long-lost half-brother comes into town, which really kind of sets things up, really kind of brings the movie to a whole different level, where this guy, pretty much without any solid proof, Plainview is able to believe him, like, oh, I have a half-brother. Because really, movie shows him as this character only kind of trusting in himself, and he wants someone who's like himself to kind of look to kind of maybe take over his own blood. You know, there will be blood. And that's not HW. We know he's adopted. He's a bastard from a basket. So he almost looks blindly towards his half-brother, played by Kevin O'Connor, of course, Benny from The Mummy, which I think he's great in this role. He's like a really soft-spoken, no reason not to trust him kind of guy, but that kind of sets things up. So he has a defective son, basically, so he sends him off, and he's focusing on the brother. But of course, as we know, he's been taking him for a ride. He's not really his brother, and that fucks everything up. So it's in that kind of chapter of the movie where, again, spoilers, he kills him, but then runs into the holdout through this whole time, Mr. Dandy. So he's setting everything up. He's pumping all the oil. He's developed this plan that's that's still used to this day, of pipelining the oil instead of using the trains, transit, losing all the money on shipping, basically, where he needs that section of land in Little Boston, on Mr. Dandy's land, to make this plan work, basically. So at this point, after all that, after the shit with his son, with his fake brother, he's just, at this point, he's desperate to lay some pipe, and well, aren't we all? But Mr. Dandy comes to him, and he knows what's up. Mr. Dandy's a very religious person, so he's like, okay, well, I kind of know what you did, motherfucker, and he's convinced him, okay, how about this? Join the church, accept the Lord into your life, and you got a deal. And so that's that. And that's kind of the ultimate defeat of Daniel Plainview, where there's that great scene. Finally, Eli has him right where he fucking wants him, and he's bringing him up to the altar, and you're a sinner. And one of the key humiliations there is that he's getting him to shout out to everyone that he's abandoned his child. And as we know from the earlier scenes, when he was talking to one of his competitions, one of the other oil businessmen, who kind of tell him, oh, you should spend more time with your son. I'm going to come to you in the middle of the night and cut your fucking throat. It's like, whoa, relax. But don't tell me how to raise my family. So we know from that earlier scene that something like that sets him off. But here he is, kind of complacent with Eli, because he needs that pipeline. That great, amazing scene between Dano and DayLewis. It's like, I've abandoned my child. I've abandoned my child. I've abandoned my boy. A great scene. But that is kind of his defeat. That's Eli's victory. That's God's victory over this man who wants to conquer everything. So that's kind of sort of what closes that whole section of the movie, his ultimate defeat in there. And, we see other things. We see HW coming back, kind of a consolation prize, but obviously, even though, at the end of this all, we know he does have some feelings for his son. He's not a complete monster, but at the same time, he's just not his blood. So the blood that there will be, not so much his own, but I don't know, the blood of Christ that he accepts. There will be blood, so that's his defeat. That's what it is. So that's kind of festering in him throughout the year. So that's why after that kind of section, we jump like many, many years. I think 10, no, like maybe 10, 15 years or so, where at this point, Plainview is like a fucking alcoholic. He's like almost crippled. He's twisted, right? And finally, he does indeed kind of abandon his son, disown his son. He's just competition to him. But we bring back Eli. So this whole thing, we know kind of that Eli's kind of full of shit. We see his sermons throughout the movie. He's like, oh, you have arthritis, go away, demon, go away. We know he's kind of full of shit, but he's never admitted it. And maybe if he can admit it, that'll be a victory of Plainview's, right? So that's kind of what that whole scene is about, and he's able to do that because Eli kind of made some bad business mistakes. No longer kind of the power hold that he once had, and he convinces him sort of like to do a deal with Plainview, where he's like, oh, well, we still have that section of land with Mr. Dandy, or Bandy, Dandy, whatever. Maybe we could cut a deal. Meanwhile, the drainage from from the pipeline, he's already figured that out, but Eli not so smart, so he gets him to like, I am a false prophet. God is a superstition. He gets him to admit that, like, oh, pretend that your whole congregation is in front of you and announce it. And so that's kind of his revenge on him for that whole shit. With abandoning my child and stuff. So I mean, ultimately, what it amounts to, he chases Eli around because he's a fucking maniac and beats him over the head and kills him with a bowling pin. So I mean, that's pretty much that. That's his sort of victory. That's his defeating God, sort of like. So that's finally him conquering God. So where is he but all alone in his own little mansion, in his own twisted darkness, having conquered everything now. What else really is there to say but I'm finished? So there's that. And, it's, you kind of do think about the movie where oil pumping and the whole oil rush and our dependence on oil, it's still a fairly new thing, like in the history of mankind as a whole, right? So this movie takes place, I believe like the beginning of the film starts in, I think, 1849, goes to 1920, somewhere around there. And we do kind of come to think, well, if Plainview represents man as a whole, what's worship more these days, God or oil? So that's maybe something to think about the movie, but it's just an excellent film. Again, the absolute driving point of the film is the performance from Daniel DayLewis. He's absolutely brilliant in it. I would say it's my favorite role, though to say his best role, it's kind of subjective or so it's hard to say. But I mean, this brought him an Oscar, his second Oscar. He won another for Lincoln later on, and it's a classic, really. I mean, if you haven't seen it, I've spoiled the whole thing, but you got to check it out. Just so many great moments. He's such an entrancing actor, really, particularly with that last scene. I love the say, like, if I have a milkshake and you have a milkshake and I have a straw, here's the straw here, and it goes all the way across the room, and I drink your milkshake. I drink it up. I love it. It's brilliant. He's brilliant. He's insane in this movie. Daniel Day-Lewis is a treasure for all time greatest actors. And this is one of the greatest movies to come in the last decade or so. I would say it would be hard for Paul Thomas Anderson to top. This is absolutely brilliant. I love it. Did it deserve to win Best Picture? That's hard to say because I really did love No Country for Old Men too. They're both so great but different. You know what I mean? So it's really hard to say. But I would say on the whole, this probably should have won it. This is a great film. Great looking film. It won 2 Oscars. It won obviously for Daniel Day-Lewis and of course for its cinematography. And who's the cinematography? Robert Elswit, who won the Oscar for cinematography. Absolutely brilliant cinematography and great music in the movie. I only have the DVD here, which DVD is kind of cool, because it looks like the packaging is like it's like a Bible. It fits kind of with the whole themes of religion and things like that, and it's pretty cool. It has all pictures and a excerpt from the novel right here, so I think that's pretty cool. I'm always kind of like a whore for really cool packaging, so that's kind of what's holding me out from getting a DVD. Come out with a cool, Blu-ray. Come out with a cool Blu-ray edition, then maybe we'll talk, okay, guys? So, yeah. So I think it's, again, just a great film. One of the best of the decade. Daniel Day-Lewis, brilliant. Paul Thomas Anderson really reached new heights with this one. I really do think that. This was his transition from, I don't know, kind of, people would kind of accuse him of being maybe like an Altman wannabe, a Scorsese wannabe, but this was him kind of finding his voice, finding something a little bit more deep and a little bit more provocative. And it's a fascinating film, not just for the performances and themes alone, but really just in general for showing, the oil rush of the time. It's a fascinating show of the process of that. So, instead of God, it's one nation under a derrick. I like the sound of that. So that's my review. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to comment, rate, subscribe, all that good stuff. Visit Derek237.com. And until next time, I drink your milkshake.